Welcome to the 2026 overview for home, HTF, and CDBG housing applications brought to you by the Montana Department of Commerce Housing Division. Applications for funding through these federal programs are due by 5:00 p.m. on September 15th. There are 3 funding programs open for applications. The first is the Home Investment Partnerships Program, or HOME program. Eligible projects include new construction and rehabilitation of multifamily housing, new construction of single-family housing, and homebuyer assistance. The second program is the Housing Trust Fund, or HTF program. Eligible projects include new construction and rehabilitation of multifamily housing. The final program is the Community Development Block Grant, or CDBG program, specifically for new construction and rehabilitation of multifamily housing and rehabilitation of single-family housing. We have application guidelines for the Home and HTF programs and for the CDBG Housing program, respectively, published on our website at commerce.mt.gov/housing/community-housing. Applications for homebuyer assistance through the HOME program or the CDBG program are separate and not part of this presentation. The application guidelines outline specific program requirements and expectations for funding applications. Complete applications will be reviewed and scored based on responses to the questions in the guidelines and the completeness of supporting documentation included with each application. The first section of questions in each program guidelines is directed at geographic diversity and housing needs. Commerce considers the location of each project and only awards full points to projects in non-entitlement communities. The entitlement communities in Montana are Missoula, Billings, Great Falls, and Bozeman for CDBG funds only. Commerce also considers the benefit to income-eligible households or specific populations targeted by the project. This means projects that are 100% affordable by program definitions, rather than mixed with market rate units, will rank highest, and projects that target special populations like seniors, adults with disabilities, or supportive housing for households experiencing homelessness will also rank higher than projects that don't. Each application must include market data, if not a full market study, so staff can evaluate the project against the documented housing needs in the community. The second section of questions allows us to evaluate the capacity of the entity applying for funds. We will rank applications based on the applicant's experience with federal funding requirements during construction, including Davis-Bacon labor standards and compliance with the Build America, Buy America Act, or BABA. We also consider project management history and property management history to evaluate experience with the long-term compliance requirements of the federal funding programs. If an applicant does not have direct experience with any of these things, that does not automatically mean a low score. You can describe the experience of consultants and partner agencies that will be brought into the project instead. In the affordability and financial feasibility section, we'll consider how well the project will operate as presented in the pro forma and subsidy review spreadsheet. A key consideration is whether or not the project has secured the other funds needed to begin construction. Applications that can provide term sheets and award letters for other sources of funds will rank higher than those that can't. All projects must demonstrate positive cash flow for the duration of the period of affordability, which varies depending on the program. Construction costs and operating expenses must be based on realistic estimates from contractors and/or similar projects. We also consider the amount of funding requested and underwrite each application so that only the amount necessary to complete the project is awarded. All new construction projects are required to submit site plans and/or preliminary designs with each application. Rehabilitation projects are required to submit a capital needs assessment and provide a scope of work that addresses all the major building components. Other key considerations under appropriate design and long-term solution include energy efficiency measures included with construction, broadband internet connections if available, and accessibility. Under long-term planning and management, we evaluate each application's attempts to include the public in early planning stages. All applications should include a letter of support from the local government and document any public meetings that were held about the project. Each application should also discuss compliance with zoning regulations, local planning documents, access to public transportation, and walkability. The questions included in Readiness to Proceed allow us to evaluate how close to breaking ground each project might be. We consider how much of the total funding is still pending or unidentified, and any environmental concerns like site contamination, radon, and proximity to the floodplain, among other things. This tab also allows us to determine if any choice-limiting actions have occurred prior to completing a HUD-compliant environmental review process. Choice-limiting actions are actions that would prohibit the use of federal funds in the project and include things like purchasing property, hiring contractors, and starting construction. Federal funding also requires projects to follow the regulations of the Uniform Relocation Act, which applies to any building or property currently occupied by residents and/or businesses. If there are current residents who will be temporarily relocated during construction, include a residential anti-displacement and relocation assistance plan with the application. And if a project will result in permanent displacement, it is ineligible to apply. Much of the information for each project will be included in the Proforma and Subsidy Review spreadsheet, which used to be called the Uniform Application or UniApp. The link to this new spreadsheet can be found on our website and must be included with each application. The top of each tab includes helpful information to consider when completing this spreadsheet. The Project Info tab is where you'll enter the basic information of the project, like location, type of construction, number of units and bedroom mix, any special populations that will be served, and basic environmental concerns. The Development Team tab tells us who is involved in each project. Make sure all of the applicant information is completed. Applicability of the other sections in this tab will vary by project. The Schedule tab establishes the timeline for the project and needs to be as complete as possible. All projects experience delays, so in order to keep the timeline realistic, be sure to build in buffer time. The Sources of Funds tab tells us how the project will be paid for. Any source marked committed must include documentation to verify that status, and all home applications must include at least 5% matching funds that can be provided in a variety of ways. The Uses of Funds tab includes all of the anticipated project costs and the source of funds to pay for each line. Blacked out sections of this tab indicate that it is not an eligible cost. Federal regulations limit contractor overhead to 2% and profit and general requirements to 6%. Construction contingency should be factored in as no less than 10% of the total construction cost. For single-family for-sale projects, the Sales Price tab helps us determine if income-eligible home buyers in the community can afford to purchase homes based on the proposed sales prices. There is also a homebuyer pre-qualification tab that determines the maximum mortgage and amount of down payment assistance needed for targeted households to buy the homes. These two tabs should be used together to determine if the project is feasible. Multifamily rental projects will complete a Utilities and Operating Expenses tab that specifies which utilities tenants will be responsible for. This also includes management fees and operating expenses that should be based on actual costs of comparable projects in similar locations. At the bottom of this tab, you'll need to include annual increases of at least 2% and meet the minimum replacement reserve requirements. Any variations from these standards should be explained in your application. The Rents tab specifies the anticipated rent for each unit in the project and the household income that is targeted. Program rent limits are published by HUD each year and can be found on the HUD Exchange. CDBG projects must target households earning at or below 80% of area median income and use HUD's fair market rents. HTF assisted units must target households earning at or below 30% of area median income and use HTF rent limits. And home assisted units must target households earning at or below 60% of area median income with high home rent limits. Of those home assisted units, 20% of those must be further restricted for households at or below 50% of area median income and use low home rents. The Pro Forma tab is automatically populated based on information from other tabs to determine the cash flow and viability of the project over time. The only exception to this is any debt service after year 15, which should be manually entered to complete the calculations. Each project must have positive cash flow for the duration of the period of affordability, which is 5 years for CDBG-Housing projects, 30 years for HTF projects, 20 years for new construction projects funded with home, and 15 years for rehabilitation projects funded with home. Each project should aim for a debt coverage ratio starting around 1.15. A ratio lower than that means the project might not be feasible, and a ratio higher than that means the project could likely support traditional financing before applying for federal funds. The Maximum Subsidy tab allows us to determine the number of units that must be restricted for each program based on a few factors noted on this slide. It is not required for applicants to complete this tab, but please note that Commerce staff will review it and correct the unit restrictions as needed to meet program requirements. When you have all of the information you need to complete the application and pro forma spreadsheet, please submit electronically through the Grants and Loans portal at montana.servicenowservices.com/mtgl. Each program has its own application in the portal, one for home, one for HTF, and one for CDBG housing. If you are applying for more than one program, you will need to submit a separate application for each program. Please follow the instructions and answer all questions as completely as possible. Supporting documentation must be uploaded to the portal at the end of each application. If you run into technical issues or have questions along the way, please don't hesitate to contact a member of the Community Housing team for assistance. Thank you for your attention, and we look forward to learning more about each project.